The woods were dark. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows. A group of young girls huddled closer, giggling nervously. Cassie, a girl with bright eyes and a mischievous grin, sat restlessly. She loved the stories, the spooky atmosphere, but something else called to her. A flash of white in the darkness, a quick movement under the trees. She knew she shouldn't. The adults had warned them about wandering off, about the dangers lurking in the dark, but Cassie, ever curious, couldn't resist the lure of the unknown. She glanced at the adults, their backs turned as they stoked the fire and chatted. Silently, Cassie slipped away from the group, her eyes fixed on the spot where she'd seen the movement. She told herself it was just a bunny, a harmless little creature she could catch and bring back as a trophy. The fire crackled, sparks flying up into the night sky like frightened fireflies. One of the mothers turned, about to check on the girls, and noticed a gap in the circle. "Where's Cassie?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. The girls looked at each other, fear replacing their earlier amusement. Cassie was gone. Panic set in. The adults, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight, began calling Cassie's name. Their voices echoed through the silent woods, unanswered. The shadows seemed to deepen, the woods holding their breath, concealing the missing girl. The scout leader, a tall, sturdy man named John, took charge. "We need to find her now," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor of worry that ran through him. John plunged into the darkness, his flashlight cutting a thin beam through the dense undergrowth. The mothers, their initial fear giving way to a steely determination, followed close behind. They called Cassie's name until their voices were hoarse, the sound swallowed by the thick trees. Minutes stretched into an agonizing hour, each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, sending a jolt of hope, quickly followed by despair. The woods, once a source of adventure and excitement, now seemed menacing, filled with unseen eyes. John, his heart pounding, refused to give up hope. He knew every inch of these woods, and he wouldn't rest until he found Cassie. "Cassie!" he yelled again, his voice raspy. "Cassie, can you hear me?" The only response was the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. As if mirroring their growing fear, the sky opened up. Rain began to fall, first in fat, lazy drops, then in a torrential downpour. The wind howled through the trees, whipping the branches into a frenzy. John pushed on, his clothes soaked through, his flashlight beams struggling against the driving rain. The mothers, their faces pale and streaked with rain and tears, followed him relentlessly. Lightning cracked the sky, momentarily illuminating the woods in an eerie white light. In that fleeting moment, John thought he saw something, a flash of white beneath a towering oak tree. "Cassie!" he roared, his voice almost lost in the wind. He stumbled towards the tree, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Underneath the oak tree, huddled and shivering, they found Cassie. She was soaked to the bone, her eyes wide with fear, but otherwise unharmed. Relief washed over John, so intense it almost brought him to his knees. They bundled Cassie in a jacket and hurried back towards the campsite, the storm still raging around them. They called out for the other mothers, their voices swallowed by the wind, but there was no answer. John, his heart sinking, realized they were alone. They reached the campsite, now a muddy mess, the fire reduced to smoldering ashes. John scanned the area, his heart pounding with a new kind of fear. The mothers, his friends, were gone. The search for the missing mothers continued for weeks, but no trace of them was ever found. Some whispered that the storm had been their undoing, that they had lost their way in the darkness and rain. Others, however, whispered of something more sinister. They spoke of the legend of the woods, of a lost soul, a wanderer who lured unsuspecting victims to their doom. They said the woods had claimed the mothers, just as it had claimed others before. Years passed. Cassie grew up, the memory of that night a haunting presence in her life, and still the legend persisted. They say that on stormy nights, if you listen closely, you can hear John's voice echoing through the trees, calling out a name lost to the wind and the rain.